Hello, hello. How is everyone? Can you hear me okay? Hey, Double D's. Can everybody hear me? Anybody? Oh, okay. It's weird being solo. Misty, hello, hello. Glad everyone's here. Do not think I'm going. I would panic. I've actually had to work a lot today, so it's been and listening to Doofus face. So in honor of a post-truth world, I am drinking my COVID vaccine. So, all right, y'all ready to get started? Um, we are going to be reading Orwell on Truth. Um, I think it's appropriate. This was written in 2017, so um, I think that it is appropriate. Yeah, I just watched the latest Kimmy Dawn one. It was good, and I ran across the proper way to wear aviators, which was hilarious. So, as always, Daniela killing it. Uh, so, here we go. I'm going to start with the introduction. Um, the introduction's by Andrew Hochschild. So, what this book is just a collection of uh, Orwell talking about truth and the power of lies. So, um, I think it's interesting, and we will hopefully have good discussions on it. I'll see how far I can get about at least an hour of streaming. So let's go. So, in the introduction, in thinking about a long ago dead author, we sometimes wonder what would he or she make of the world today? Even though he died nearly 70 years ago, George Orwell often seems as if he were writing about the world today. Could we have a better guide to Donald Trump's America? When a senior aide to the president when to President Trump talked about alternative facts at a time when the real ones, a low turnout for his inauguration, starkly visible in photographs, were embarrassing. What is that but the twisting of truth and the propaganda that Orwell described so chillingly in 1984 and elsewhere? In a 1943 essay excerpted from in this book, he wrote, Nazi theory specifically denies such a thing as the truth exists. If the leader says of such and such an event, it never happened, well, it never happened. If he says that two and two are five, well, two and two are five. This prospect frightens me much more than bombs. Is this not the universe that President Trump, surrounded by embarrassing facts on all sides, would live in? Similarly, when Trump speaks of Mexican immigrants saying they're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, this is a mindset Orwell knew well. For he writes in another piece in these pages of the habit of assuming that human beings can be classified like insects, and that whole blocks of millions or tens of millions of people can be confidently labeled good or bad. Or take a further Orwell insight that seems based on today's headlines. All nationalists have power of not seeing resemblances between similar sets of facts. A British Tory will defend determination in Europe and oppose it in India with no feeling of inconsistency. Actions are held to be good or bad, not on their own merits, but according to who does them. As I write this, Trump has just addressed the United Nations General Assembly, praising the principle of sovereignty and condemning nations like North Korea and Iran that he accuses of threatening the sovereignty of other countries, but not mentioning the outright seizure of Crimea from sovereign Ukraine by the autocrat he such admires, Vladimir Putin of Russia. Hey, RA, good to see you. With Common Core math, 2 plus 2 does indeed equal 5, Misty. Look, when I use math every day, I use complex math every day for work. And when my kids needed help with their Common Core math, I just threw my hands up and I couldn't get it. I mean, maybe my head's too ingrained in calculus, trigonometry, and geometry. I don't know, but it is definitely not something that I was ever good at. Thank God I have one half time in college and half time in high school. So, continuing on with the introduction, lest we forget, contempt for facts is not new. It was an unnamed member of the George W. Bush's staff in 2004 who interviewed by New York Times Magazine, steeringly referred to the reality based community. He added, "That's not the way the world really works anymore. We are an empire now. And when we act, we create our own reality." I actually know who that guy is. I actually have been in a room with that person. And boy, is I he he's getting his just desserts in Sheol, I'm sure, and being redeemed that way. Sorry, I shouldn't jeer at the departed. Consider just one topic: climate change. For decades, after an immense propaganda effort financed by oil companies, an appalling number of Americans have vociferously denied that human beings have anything to do with climate change. As a succession of unusually severe hurricanes lash our land and rising ocean waters flood our shores, could even Orwell have imagined such a defiant assertion that 2 and 2 equal 5? All of us in the reality based community need him more than ever. So, I mean, you know, climate change is only the hurricanes and tornadoes and stuff are created by our space lasers and stuff. So I I brought my small hat hanging behind me to remind people of that, you know. But me and Scotto's doing the changeover. He gets the space laser on January 1st. So next section of the introduction. Any questions, comments? I admit, Misty, my ex and my daughter are my middle daughter are both teachers, and they can't stand it. So they specialized in other things. So okay, As this collection makes clear, Orwell valued truth above all else, and he detested political lies. What's up, Senor Jefe? You got some shout outs today over at my buddy's side. So, as well as I was very much shouted out over there. So, I guess I need to give you my page info so he can shout me out. Maybe those people over there could learn something. So let's see. Orwell valued truth above all else, and he detested political lies, sometimes even more than violence. Fights and swings. Hey, it's the best way to be in life, man. And training Duke with that Nerf gun is pretty hilarious too. Um, so what gave Orwell his uncanny truth-seeking radar? I believe it can be traced to several key experiences. Literate and well read though he was, his life lived in the real world, bringing him face to face with ruthless forces that on one occasion almost killed him. As the critic Christopher Hitchens once said, Orwell personally encountered the three great malevolent movements of the 20th centuries: European imperialism, fascism, and communism, and took the right stand on all three. Imperialism was the first. He had been born in India, where his father was a colonial civil servant. Although Orwell was taken back to England as a small child, he had long dreamed of returning to the East. After finishing his schooling, he set off in 1922 at the age of 19 to join the Indian Imperial Police in Burma, which was the governed part of British India. Learning to speak the local language, he found the British Empire to be far more brutal and less glorious enterprise than what he had imagined. After 5 years, this quote, I had already made up my mind that imperialism was an evil thing, and the sooner I chucked up my job and got out of it, the better. Quote. He returned to England determined to become a writer. Many intellectuals of the day criticized imperialism from the safety of their desk, but it was rare indeed for such an opponent to emerge from the colonial bureaucracy itself, especially from the police. Surely Orwell's feelings were heightened by the conflict between his beliefs and the role he had found himself in. He explored those emotions in his novel, Burmese Days, excerpted here and in two essays, A Hanging and Shooting an Elephant. The latter is a particularly brilliant piece of writing in which Orwell describes how, as a police officer, he was confronted with an elephant that had broken free of its chain and killed someone. Once he saw the situation, he realized that the elephant didn't have to be killed in return, only guarded carefully until its mahout, whom it would obey, arrived on the scene. So his mahout or trainer. But a crowd of angry Burmese was demanding that he shoot the elephant, and he knew he would lose face if he did not. A sahib has got to act like a sahib. He has got to appear resolute. For every such rule, it is the condition of his rule that he shall spend his life in trying to impress the natives. And so, in every crisis, he has got to do what the natives expect of him. My whole life, every white man's life in the East, was one long struggle, not to be laughed at. Hey, Jenny. He shot the elephant. I once assigned this essay in a narrative writing workshop I was teaching in India, not all sure of how Indian students would react to a former colonial officer bringing the conflict in his soul, but they were deeply impressed. One, speaking of Orwell, painstaking honesty about his own conflicted feelings, said, I quote, "I didn't know it was possible to write like that." Soon after, a disillusioned Orwell returned to Europe from being seeing imperialism firsthand in Burma. Like millions of others, he became deeply alarmed by the rise of another powerful system, fascism. Benito Mussolini had been in office in Italy since the early 1920s, and then Adolf Hitler took power in Germany in 1933. Suddenly, Western Europe's largest and most powerful country was under a dictator's rule. Jeff, understand the hands full, have fun while everybody's awake. Um, and I'm sure we have a good show in front of us tonight, uh, given goings on in the sector. So, that dictator was issuing laws restricting Jews, sending soldiers goose stepping through the streets, and ordering his party's thugs to beat and murder his political enemies. Ominously, a half a dozen or other European countries, from Portugal to Lithuania, Hungary to Greece, were also under regimes of the far right. In England itself, the British Union of Fascists boasted 50,000 members, wearing black tunics, black trousers, and wide black leather belts. They paraded through Jewish neighborhoods of London under flag with lightning bolt, shouting insults, giving the straight arm salute, and beating up anyone in their way. As a French writer, Andre Malraux put it, fascism has spread its great black wings over Europe. In 1936, the brewing tension between fascism and democracy abruptly broke into outright war. In Spain, a large group of far right army officers staged a coup against the elected government of the Spanish Republic. In the first weeks of fighting, the plotters seized roughly a third of Spain. Germany and Italy rushed aid to the nationalists, as the rebellious right wing officers themselves, military advisors, artillery, ammunition, the latest tanks, and fighter aircraft crews to fly them. Mussolini would, before long, send some 80,000 ground troops as well. It was instantly clear that if the nationalists won the Spanish Civil War, Hitler and Mussolini would have a new ally. The beleaguered Spanish Republic appealed desperately for aid, and soon volunteers from more than 50 countries came to Spain to fight in its defense. One of them was George Orwell. He arrived in Barcelona just after Christmas of 1936 and immediately joined a militia unit at the front. His memoir of the next 6 months, Homage to Catalonia, is his greatest work of nonfiction. But it was not only fascism that Orwell came up against in Spain. There was something of a civil war within the Civil War. For politics on the Republican side of the front lines was bewilderingly complex. Britain, France, and the United States, not wanting to get drawn into a new European war, had all refused to sell arms to the Spanish Republic. Eventually, the only major country that did so was not another democracy, but Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union. And Stalin demanded political favors in return, high positions for both Spanish and Soviet communists, and the Republic's government, armed forces, and police. Hey, Double D's, sorry it's been cold at night and not having a squid to warm you. The ruthless and paranoid Stalin had no tolerance for any kind of dissent within the world communist movement. At home, anyone who questioned his authority was shot or sent to the gulag. Prominent renegades abroad, like his archenemy Leon Trotsky, often ended up assassinated. In Spain, the Republic's coalition government was highly factious. Stalin repeatedly pushed it to suppress a small left-wing party that was critical to the Soviet Union. Orwell, as it happened, had joined the militia unit of that party. The Partido Obrero de Unificación Marxista, or POUM, which we will now refer to it as. At one point, coming to Barcelona from the front for what he had hoped for would be a week's leave, he became caught up in a bloody street fight between the POUM and its political allies on one side and the communist dominated police on the other. That fighting ended in a truce, and a shaken Orwell returned to the war. Water break. Questions? Good. Glad he's going to be back. Glad y'all be seeing each other. So Orwell has returned to the war. Good nap, Daniela. We'll be thinking about y'all at the rosary. So Orwell's returned to the war. A few weeks later, he narrowly escaped death. He was supervising a change of sentries in his frontline trench when a nationalist bullet passed through his neck, just missing his carotid artery. After a spell in military hospitals, Orwell received permission to leave the army and again return to Barcelona. There, he planned to meet his wife, who had been working at a POUM English language newspaper, and go back to England. To his dismay, when he reached the city, he had to go underground. The POUM and its publications had been banned, and many of its leaders and supporters thrown in jail. Several of them, including a Scottish fellow soldier whom Orwell knew well, would die there. After he spent several nights in hiding, one of them sleeping in a vacant lot, he and his wife were finally able to slip out of the country a few days later. Hey, Michael. Hope you're doing good. For him, the most searing part of this experience was seeing the lies that surrounded it. Whatever the deficiencies of the POUM, and even Orwell felt it suffered from revolutionary purism, he and his fellow militiamen had spent months in cold, muddy trenches, risking their lives in the fight against fascism. But communists had thoroughly taken control of the Spanish Republic's propaganda machinery and claimed the POUM was in league with the nationalists, sending them military secrets in invisible ink and clandestine radio transmissions. So this is pre-entry into World War II. This is during the Spanish Civil War. Um, does that kind of mirror U.S. selling arms to Ukraine? World War III in the making. Well, I mean, oof. Good question and a good thing to think about. I mean, to watch um, the way it's pushed and the way it looks. You know, you have similar ally and axis powers, if you want to call them that. North Korea supporting Russia. We don't know what the U.S. is going to do moving into this administration with the stacked Supreme Court, uh, legislative branch, and executive branch. It could lead to that, definitely. You have the Middle East stuff going on, um, in the different sides, us fighting proxy with Ukraine, kind of proxy with Israel. Um, and then you have us in Russia, in Syria, fighting on different sides. And now, Israel's attacking Iran. It's it's definitely something to look at. Do I think conspiratorially like Todd? Not necessarily, but I'm also not dumb. Um, Jeff, I think information war definitely is. You got a World War III scenario going on in information and digital war, absolutely. And then with the proxy wars, there's I was talking to my rabbi in Jerusalem last night. He tracks all that stuff. I think he said there's 57 proxies going on right now, wars across the world. So I mean, when you have 197 to 200 countries, according to how things get broken up, um, the absolute possibility, and that's kind of why I'm going with this book. Is you got to look at information, and you've got to look at truth, and who's spitting alternative facts, and learning how to spot alternative facts. Um, but you do make a good point. Um, I definitely do not disagree. Well, I mean, we can argue Venezuela all day long, but Venezuela, since they built the jail, I think border crossings by Venezuelans down like 95%. So, so it's kind of crazy. El Salvador is a different story. Um, I've got El Salvador stories out the ass. That was a wild scene down there in the early 2000s. So let's see. I done forgot where I was, y'all. Okay, clandestine radio transmissions. Um, hey, Joey Simpson, you possibly Chris person, uh, possible subversive, multi-personality person. That's quoting someone, by the way. So foreign reporters tended, this is important, foreign reporters tended to repeat what the Republic's spokespeople told them. And even in the New York Times and Ernest Hemingway in Spain, reporting for a U.S. newspaper syndicate, published some of these canards. Soon afterwards, the London Daily Worker, the British communist newspaper, charged that Orwell himself had periodically left the POUM trenches to make secret rendezvous with nationalist troops in no man's land. Seeing himself and his fellow anti-fascists, there's that dirty word. His fellow anti-fascists, the subjects of such preposterous charges, had immense impact on Orwell and would be reflected more than a decade later in 1984 in his excoriating portrait of the Ministry of Truth. Just as he had sensed the hypocrisy of the heart of British imperialism and the malice in Hitler's scapegoating of the Jews, here was yet a third totalitarian system that depended on the power of the lie. Small wonder that having lived through all of this before, he even turned 35. He did all this before 35. Some people can't do a third of that at 55. Orwell was to become his century's greatest truth teller. I do not disagree with that. Orwell and Ray Bradbury are a couple of my favorite truth tellers. My middle daughter, she had to fill in for a teacher in fifth grade today, and one of the students came in and it. Why, thank you. I hope you noticed my small hat hanging on my propeller. Um, but anyway, she had a comic book of Fahrenheit 451. And she goes, "That's just insane." I was like, "Why? It's awesome." A kid is excited about truth and what people want to do against books and stuff. And so she was actually just proud. She just thought it was kind of crazy that it was a comic book, but hey, however you can get truth out there, right? Let's see. This collection on truth, um, drawn from his books, essays, letters, and to a large extent from his. Oh, had a cat in the background. So I'm going to start this paragraph over. I'm sorry, ADD. This collection, drawn from his books, essays, letters, and to a large extent from his journalism, shows Orwell's truth seeking radar at work in every direction. And we should all be that way. From the British Empire to contemporary writers, to the media, to Joseph Stalin, to nationalism, not to be confused with patriotism. From the politics of the English language to the publications of Animal Farm, Orwell mercilessly attacks propaganda and dishonesty everywhere he sees it. As he puts it in one essay, the first thing that we ask of a writer is that he shan't tell lies. It was his credo, and I think he did a very good job at it. R.A. Great. Yeah, I think Fahrenheit 451 was my first Bradbury book too, and so very very visual cues coming out of the words. I do believe in my personal view. Okay, double D's. We will see you on the tubes around the sector. Michael, yeah. These are things I keep reading because they're inspirational and they they teach us to keep a curious mind and fact check and refact check, even if those facts do not comport with our preconceived notions. Hey, priestess, how are you? So, what would he make of our sorry world today? Not my words. The words of Mister. Got to read it to say his last name. Hochschild. Sorry. In some cases, I guess you could say that. Some people in the world. It's not hard to guess since he predicted so many dimensions of it, even though he lived in the infancy of television and electronic surveillance. For example, and this is so visual, right? When I read 1984 for the first time, these things just popped out at me, and as they've come about, I'm like, wow, it is just so amazing that he saw these things. For example, he nonetheless foresaw their power and in 1984 combined them into one instrument, the telescreen. In homes and offices throughout the fictional superpower in his novel, telescreens both ceaselessly broadcast propaganda and monitor everyone's behavior. Would he be surprised at Edward Snowden's revelations of the pervasive way in which the US government eavesdrops on millions of people's emails, cell phones at home or and abroad? Or would he be surprised that we've ended up with a reality TV star as a president? Orwell seems to have seen it all coming. Uh, and let me give a nod to Todd for just a moment. When he cries about the Five Eyes and everything, and everybody blames the U.S. for eavesdropping on U.S. citizens. The Five Eyes, that is actually their job. You can look up um, Pine Gap and other places, um, but there's 5 countries that are in charge of eavesdropping on everyone. Wait, double D's. That's kind of funny because I mean, my super far right family think of him as a hero as well, and that's actually one thing that we can agree on. uh, so it's kind of crazy. So welcome then to this array of excerpts from his writing. Think of them not as a main dish, but as a tasting menu. For the full power of his eloquence, you have to read his works whole, whether they be novels like 1984, which evokes an entire dystopian world, or a memoir like Down and Out in Paris and London, or the letters in which he is forceful and clear sighted writing to a friend as to a wider audience, or the great essay about his school days. Such were the joys, which shows that there can be hypocrisy and abuse of power in a provincial boarding school, just as there is in a police state. But this is an excellent place to start, or to sample the full range of Orwell's targets for readers who know him only from 1984 or Animal Farm. Throughout all he wrote, he advises the hope that by speaking honestly about the world as he saw it, he could help others as well to see through its pretenses, falsehoods, and illusions. In hard times, it's a worthy faith. Nah, I'm sure not. I struggled with it at the beginning because you know, we all um, signed a. I mean, you had the same clearance we did for some time, and um, so there's that struggle, right? Because we signed that, we're under NDAs, blah blah blah. I still take offense to some things sometimes, but um, leakers make the world go round, folks. The break-in of the FBI building in 1971. Correct me if I'm wrong, history buffs. Um, During the Nixon thing, exposed COINTELPRO and and the other surveillance programs that were going on and the abuses under the Edgar Hoover um, police state. I mean, I'll say it. I mean, so now it's hackers and leakers that we depend on. Deep Throat. takes on a whole new meaning these days, yes. But exposed Nixon, right? He exposed the cover up. Um, my rabbi talks about he was a teenager during Nixon thing, and his mom always told him it's not the lie that catches his son, it's the cover up. And and that's and that's the truth. Mark Twain talking about if you tell the truth, you don't have to keep telling lies to cover up the initial lie. I mean, I think that yeah, but you still had to go through this stuff and sign the paperwork, stuff like that. Um, SEI was way different, and then when I got into special access programs, it was shit I didn't want to know. Um, but where was I going with all this? Anyway, so let's start on chapter 1. We've only been going 41 minutes. Anybody comments, questions? Liberal, not leverage. I don't. I don't consider myself a liberal. I'm a libertarian. Uh, I think that burning it all down and building something better is um, the way to go because corruption has got dug its holes in so deep. If you hadn't hit like yet, like, subscribe, share, tickle it, dislike it. I mean, uh, I'm revealing my political bent just a little bit, but I think it's necessary. And if you're leaning, and you're here, and there's something you want us to go over, I'm a I'm more than happy to discuss it. Double D's. I'm a 2A absolutist. I mean, if I could have a suitcase nuke, I'd have it. If I could if I could have an A10, I'd have it. Um, I don't have those kind of ducats, and I don't have the money to fight that in court to the Supreme Court. Um, but I've read a lot of history. Doesn't matter how many times a civilization. Hey, I can do this, dummy. Um, how many times a civilization is burned and restarted if humans are involved? Corruption. Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's just like religions, right? The good in theory until you put humans in it. And, you'll have to tune in when I start talking about that stuff. So, Glenn Jacobs is probably the most well-known libertarian politician right now. I really heard anything bad about him from his constituents. He's the mayor of Knox County, Tennessee. Huh. I was uh I was just south of there. I used to live in Chattanooga. Absolutely, Spider Dog. If you're not, I think I said this on F3 the other night about when election after the election's over, you got to forget the politics and you got to represent everybody um, equally and without measure. Hamilton, no, Hamilton. I'm more of a Burr person than Hamilton. if you're not familiar with the way Burr handled things and the way Burr thought. So Burr wanted to expel all of the English sympathizers, the um, all the British aristocracy that want. Oh, Hamilton County. Yes, yes, yes. I'm sorry. I sorry going into history, but um, yeah, I mean Trump's the president, and we have to work within the system. Did you, priestess? I would absolutely be honored to have Burr in a family tree. He had his problems, but that was during Burr's time in Congress. It was another congressman that beat a opponent to death on the Senate floor. Um, Burr engaged in duels. Burr had a duel scheduled with Hamilton. So the Burr Hamilton thing, I'm sorry, I've gotten sidetracked from the original premise. I promise we'll get back. Uh, the Burr Hamilton thing. So Hamilton wanted to keep the money consolidated in the cities, and and Burr wanted power. He wanted to take the money from the the ruling class, if you will, and um just and send them back to England, and then distribute the money among the farmers who who didn't benefit from the revolution to any extent. They weren't paying taxes. It was the rich that were paying the taxes. The revolution was, I mean, the whole tax thing um, was about that, right? Um, but either way, we got the country we got, right? But Hamilton, that fight was in New York over, I guess, a royalist fight uh, against the uh, the ruralist. So anyway, Cap, how are you doing, bud? All right, chapter one. All right, I'll get on a history bin again. Um, so, quote, the truth about the English and their empire from Burmese days, 1934. Laurie celebrated his 27th birthday in a hospital, covered from head to foot with hideous sores, which were called mud sores, but were probably caused by whiskey and bad food. They left little pits in his skin, which did not appear for 2 years. Quite suddenly, he had begun to look and feel very much older. His youth was finished. 8 years of Eastern life, fever, loneliness, and intermittent drinking had set their mark on him. All right, Michael. I mean, um, just do what you got to do. You're going live about 6:30. Sweet. Well, I mean, you got to take care of those you love, buddy. Just hit the like button, and hopefully you'll finish watching later. Um, since then, each year had been lonelier and more bitter than the last. What was at the center of all his thoughts now, and what poisoned everything, was the even bitterer hatred of the atmosphere of imperialism in which he lived. For, as his brain developed, You cannot stop your brain developing, and it is one of the tragedies of the half educated that they develop late. That can be that can be pointed in any number of directions. When they were already committed to some wrong way of life, he had grasped the truth about the English and their empire. The Indian Empire is a despotism, benevolent, no doubt, a des- still a despotism with theft as its final object. And as to the English of the East, the Sahiblag Flory had come so to hate them from living in their society that he was quite incapable of being fair to them. For, after all, these poor devils are no worse than anybody else. They lead unenviable lives. It is a poor bargain to spend 30 years ill paid in an alien country and then come home with a wrecked liver and a pineapple backside from sitting in cane chairs to settle down as the bore of some second rate club. I I do love the way he gets colorful and descriptive in his talking. Anybody who's sat in a cane chair for too long knows exactly what that feels like. On the other hand, the side blog are not to be idolized. There is a prevalent idea that the men at the outposts of empire are at least able and hardworking. It is a delusion. Outside the scientific services, the forest department, the public works department, and the like, there is no particular need for a British official in India to do his job competently. Few of them work as hard or as intelligently as the postmaster of a provincial town in England. The real work of administration is done mainly by native subordinates, and the real backbone of the despotism is not the officials but the army. Given the army, the officials of the businessmen can rub along safely enough, even if they are fools. And most of them are fools. A dull, decent people, cherishing and fortifying their dullness behind 250,000 bayonets. It is stifling, stultifying world in which to live. It is a world in which every word and every thought is censored. In England, it is hard even to imagine such an atmosphere. Everyone is free in England. We sell our souls in public and buy them back in private. Among our friends, but even friendship can hardly exist when every white man is a cog in the wheel of despotism. Free speech is unthinkable. All other kinds of freedom are permitted. You're free to be a drunkard, an idler, a coward, a backbiter, a fornicator, but you are not free to think for yourself. Your opinion on every subject of any conceivable importance is dictated for you by the Puka Shahib code. Sorry, jump out of my in the end, the secrecy of your revolt poisons you like a secret disease. Your whole life is a life of lies. Year after year, you sit in Kipling haunted little clubs, whiskey to the right of you, Pincun to the left of you, listening and eagerly agreeing with Colonel Badger develops his theory that these bloody nationalists should be boiled in oil. The nationalists of India, by the way, the Colonel Badger a um, is a British colonel. You hear your Oriental friends called greasy little baboos, and you admit dutifully that they are greasy little baboos. You see Lotus fresh from school kicking gray haired servants. The time comes when you burn with hatred your own countrymen when you long for a native rising to drown their empire in blood. And in this, there is nothing honorable, hardly even any sincerity for Alphonse. What do you care if the Indian Empire is a despotism? If Indians are bullied and exploited, you only care because the right of free speech is denied you. You're a creature of the despotism, a puka sahib tied tighter than a monk or a savage, but an unbreakable system of taboos. You are, man, this is his kind of a classic, kind of a classic Orwellian poster, if you will. Uh, Very easily made, very powerful, very thought provoking, right? Okay. So, quote: in England, we tamely admit to being robbed in order to keep 500,000 worthless idlers in luxury. But we would fight to the last man sooner than to be ruled by Chinamen. From the Road to Wigan Pier, 1937. I was in the Indian police 5 years, and by the end of that time, I hated imperialism. I was serving with a bitterness which I probably cannot make clear. In the free air of England, that kind of thing, it is not fully intelligible. From the most unexpected people, from gin pickled old scoundrels high up in the government service, I have heard some remark as, of course, we've no right in the blasted country at all. Only now we're here, for God's sake, let's stay here. The truth is that no modern man in his heart of hearts believes that it is right to invade a foreign country and hold the population down by force. Foreign oppression is a much more obvious, understandable evil than the economic oppression. Thus, in England, we tamely admit to being robbed in order to keep 500,000 worthless idlers in luxury. But we would fight to the last man sooner than to be ruled by Chinamen. Similarly, people who live in unearned dividends without a single qualm of conscience see clearly enough that it is wrong to go and lord it in a foreign country where you are not wanted. The result is that every Anglo Indian is haunted by a sense of guilt, which he usually conceals at best as best he can. Because there is no freedom of speech, and merely to be overheard making seditious remarks may damage his career. All over India, there are Englishmen who secretly loathe the system of which they are a part. And just occasionally, when they are quite certain of being in the right company, their hidden bitterness overflows. I remember a night I spent on the train with a man in the educational service, a stranger to myself whose name I never discovered. It was too hot to sleep, and we spent the night in talking. Half an hour's cautious questioning decided each of us that the other was safe. And then, for hours, while the train jolted slowly through the pitch black night, sitting up in our bunks with bottles of beer handy, we damned the British Empire, damned it from the inside, intelligently and intimately. It did us both good, but we had been speaking forbidden things. And in the haggard morning, in the light, when the train crawled into Mandalay, we parted as guiltily as any adulterous couple. So, quote, let us all to get together and have a good hate. From Coming Up from Air for Air, June of 1939. Hilda said she was going to the left book club meeting. It seemed that there was a chap coming down from London to lecture. Though needlessly to say, Hilda didn't know what the lecture was going to be about. I told her I'd go with her. In a general way, I'm not much of a one for lectures, but the visions of war I'd had that morning started with the bomber flying over the train had put me into a kind of thoughtful mood. RA, no doubt. I dig it. Just grab some beers and have a good hate. After the usual argument, we got the kids to bed early and cleared off in time for the lecture, which was billed for 8 o'clock. Indeed, Orwell, the the original player hater. It was a misty kind of evening, and the hall was cold and not too well lighted. Oh, that's what Britain looked like all the time. It's a little wooden hall with a tin roof, the property of some nonconformist sect or other, and you can hire it for 10 bob. The usual crowd of 15 or 16 people had rolled up. On the front of the platform, there was a yellow placard announcing that the lecture was on the menace of fascism. At the beginning, I wasn't exactly listening. The lecturer was rather mean looking little chap, but a good speaker, white face, very mobile mouth, and rather grating voice that they get from constant speaking. Of course, he was pitching it into Hitler and the Nazis. I wasn't particularly keen to hear what he was saying, and the same stuff in the news chronicle every morning, but his voice came across to me as kind of burr, 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 with now and again a phrase that stuck out and caught my attention. Bestial atrocities, hideous outbursts of sadism, rubber truncheons, concentration camps, iniquitous persecution of the Jews, back to the Dark Ages, European civilization, act before it's too late, indignation of all decent peoples, alliance of the democratic nations, firm stand, defense of democracy, democracy, fascism, democracy, fascism, democracy. You know, turn it out by the hour, just like a gramophone. Turn the handle, press the button, and it starts. Democracy, fascism, democracy. But somehow it interested me to watch him. A rather mean little man with a white face and a bald head standing on a platform shooting out slogans. What is he doing? Quite deliberately and quite openly, he's stirring up hatred, doing his damnedest to make you hate certain foreigners called fascists. It's a queer thing, I thought, to be known as Mr. So and so, the well known anti fascist. A queer trade, anti fascism. This fellow, I suppose, makes his living by writing books against Hitler. But what did he do before Hitler came along? And what he'll do if Hitler ever disappears? Same question applies to doctors, detectives, rat catchers, and so forth, of course. But the gathering voice went on, and another that thought struck me. He means it, not faking it at all. Feels every word he's saying. He's trying to work up hatred in the audience, but that's nothing to the hatred he feels himself. Every slogan's gospel truth to him. I'd stopped listening to the actual words of the lecture, but there are more ways than one of listening. I shut my eyes for a moment. The effect of that was curious. I seemed to see the fellow much better when I could only hear his voice. It was a voice that sounded as if it could go on for a fortnight without stopping. It's a ghastly thing, really, to have a sort of human barrel organ shooting propaganda at you by the hour. The same thing over and over again. Hate, hate, hate. Let's all get together and have a good hate over and over. It gives you a feeling that something has got inside your skull and is hammering down on your brain. But for a moment, with my eyes shut, I managed to turn the tables on him. I got inside his skull. It was a peculiar sensation. For about a second, I was inside him. You might almost say I was him. At any rate, I felt what he was feeling. I saw a vision of what he was seeing, and it wasn't at all the kind of vision that can be talked about. What he's saying is merely that Hitler's after us, and we must all get together and have a good hate. Doesn't go into detail, leaves it all respectable, but what he's seeing is something quite different. It's a picture of himself smashing people's faces with a spanner wrench, if you don't know. Fascist faces, of course. I know that's what was seeing. It was what I saw myself for the second or two that I was inside him. Smash right in the middle. The bones cave in like an eggshell. And what was a face a minute ago is just a great big blob of strawberry jam. Smash. There goes another. That's what's in his mind, waking and sleeping. The more he thinks of it, the more he likes it. And it's all okay because the smashed faces belong to fascists. Well, that's a fascist fascist. You could hear all that in the tone of his voice. But why? Likeliest the explanation because he's scared. Every thinking person nowadays is stiff with fright. This is merely a chap who's got sufficient foresight to be a little more frightened than others. Hitler's after us. Quick, let's grab a spanner and get together, and perhaps if we smash enough faces, they won't smash ours. Gang up, choose your leader. Hitler's black, and Stalin's white. But it might just as well be the other way around, because in the little chap's mind, both Hitler and Stalin are the same. Both mean spanners and smashed faces. War. I started thinking about it again. It's coming soon, that's certain. But who's afraid of war? That's to say, who's afraid of the bombs and the machine guns? You are, you say. Yes, I am. And so is anybody who's ever seen them. But it isn't the war that matters. It's the after war. The world we're going down into, it's kind of a hate world, slogan world. Sound familiar, y'all? The colored shirts, the barbed wire, the rubber truncheons, the secret cells where the electric light burns night and day, and the detectives watching you while you sleep. The process, the processions, the posters with in the enormous faces, and the crowds of a million people all cheering for the leader till they deafen themselves into thinking what they really worship him, and all the time underneath they hate him so that they want to puke. It's all going to happen, or isn't it? Some days I know it's impossible. Other days I know it's inevitable. I knew it was going to happen. It was all in the sound of the little lecturer's voice. Everybody good? They have propaganda. They're coming for us. We had to get them before they get us. Yes. Yes, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's othering and theying and Was the little man right for speaking out against the other little man from Austria? I would say yes. I'm a big proponent of if you see hate in any form and the othering, you need to call it out and search it out and and not really shout it down, but come at it with facts. And it depends on whether people want to hear those facts, but never let up. I don't think I could be well, I may be the little man at the lecture hall, but I'm I am of Orwell's mind that if you've seen war, you kind of don't want to see it again. So, um, but anyway, expose it to the light. Exactly, Spider Dog. Thank you for putting it succinctly as I was not able to. So, and my brain went into its regular reset cycle. Right? It's like my James Baldwin quote from that I put up yesterday on Discord. I don't. Did you see it? Ra, are you interested to hear what it says? I'll quote it here. It's short. We can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and my right to exist. So I I think that is that puts it about as succinctly as I can do it. Um, Linda, I don't think I said hello to you, and I apologize. Um, so let's get one more of these sections going. It is good history if mediocre fiction. It is good history if mediocre fiction. From Review of World's End by Upton Sinclair. Tribune, 13 September 1940. I have never quite been able to make up my mind whether Upton Sinclair is a very good novelist or a very bad one. Since I have continued to read him for many a long year. Hey, Chino Nino. Good to see you. Good to see you're keeping sandwich boards great again with your avatar still. See, since I have continued to read him for many a long year, the question might seem to have answered itself. If I could say that I got the same kind of pleasure out of his novels that I got out of others. But in any case, what is a novel? The mere fact that Tom Jones, Sons and Lovers, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and Tarzan of the Apes are all classified as novels is enough to show one how vague the category is. It's funny that it's funny that writers back then were calling out each other on what they considered to be part of their art and what they didn't consider to be part of their art. Um, so I guess Orwell did not think that those books um, deserved the honorarium of being novels. Mr. Sinclair's books, also classified as novels, so books, are actually tracts, a sort of socialist adaptation of the old style religious tract, in which the young man who is on the road to ruin hears a striking sermon and therefore thereafter touches nothing stronger than cocoa. What gave these things the, the literary power they often possessed was the fact that their authors believed in them. It was certainly not that they showed any knowledge of real life or any sense of character. It is rather the same with Mr. Sinclair. He knows, just as the Hebrew prophets knew, that the world is full of evil, and the depth of his feeling gives life to a series of tremendous sermons that probably lose rather than gain by being cast in story form. At different times, he has written show ups of the press, the coal trade, the meat trade, the oil trade, and I forget what else. This time in World's End, it is the armaments racket. When you know that Lanny Budd, the hero who is a gifted and warm-hearted American boy who has been brought up in the most cultivated European society on the proceeds of his father's thriving trade in machine guns, hand grenades, and other instruments of murder, you know the story more or less. For here, in all Mr. Sinclair's books, there is not, properly speaking, any plot, merely the unfolding of a social theme and the story of one individual's growing awareness of it, with conversion to socialism somewhere about the last chapter. Oh, I wanted to. He said something about fascism in European boarding schools, and I was I was reading about man, I forget his name. His name completely just left my brain, but he is widely considered the inventor of the modern suit that a man wears. Um, and he grew up. He went to Eton. He was a playboy. He grew up along Jane Eyre, and most of her male protagonists are modeled on this guy. But he wrote about his time in Eton. And this guy was like a man's man when he was first year in Eton. He didn't have to endure the hazing and the rituals. Everybody was just like he had this thing, right? He he exuded this confidence and competence that everybody wanted to be in his orbit. But he was talking about the system in which Eton was just brutal. And this is going to sound terrible, but it's where these terms came from. Um, the upperclassman was the master, and the lower classman was called the fag. And the fag was used and abused, and then came up doing in a sexual way, not only in a hazing way um, as many of us who came up in the army, armed forces, and stuff. Uh, Hell, even coming up in the trades. If Joey's still in here, I'm sure working the trades, he knows about the hazing you do with apprentices and stuff like that. But it was a rigid fascist system uh, built on terror and abuse. Exactly, Woodrow. But I mean, uh, and how are you doing, by the way? Um, but sexual abuse is never okay. So that's that's kind of what I wanted to get at. And they had to pay him tribute and all this other stuff. And so it was a rigid system of abuse. Oh, thank you, Woodrow. I'm I'm trying. So okay, so we stopped at socialism ending. Absolutely great for me. Probably RA. I mean, it was going on long before he got to eat, and probably still goes on to some extent. I don't probably don't think they have those terms anymore, but it was funny because at 14 they could drink, right? So they would go out on the town and he and that's what it was essentially was when they would go out on the town, they were learning to drink and network. It it was that part of it was cool, but they would fight all the time. They would rob people. What was it? Then they had this thing where they would dress up in military garb and once a year, and they would stand on the bridge and rob people. But the next day, they would return the items that they stole. It was um, very, very interesting story. I wish I could remember. I'll put it on Discord. I don't remember the guy's name. It is a pretty interesting story. He had a pretty interesting military career too. So um, yeah, absolutely. Art Woodrow. Um, that's what we started out about. When we were just talking about the Ministry of Truth and the telescreen pre YouTube pranksters. Oh Lord, get yourself confined in Korea, which I don't know if any of y'all followed that Johnny Somali, the YouTube prankster who got in a lot of trouble in Korea. He was took his shirt off and was kissing the statues of the comfort women, uh, being a general nuisance, and he was booked. But what Korea does with foreign people, they don't put them in jail. They take their passports and say, "Okay, now you're on the street. You gotta do something to survive, or we have work camps for you." So, so I think it's kind of funny. He can't leave Korea, and oh yeah, RA, it's just absolutely insane the way that Israel was the best because they just freaking the way he talked to that Israeli female soldier, and they freaking took care of him. Absolutely insane. Anyway, so and he got kicked out of Japan too. So what an idiot. So where Mr. Sinclair does excel, however, is in his facts. He has probably laid bare more iniquities than any writer of our time. And you can be sure in every case that he is telling you more than the truth and even a little less than the truth. I have no doubt that the detailed accounts of barefaced swindling and cynical conscious warmongering Sir Basil Zarhoff and others for real personages come into the book that are given here are perfectly accurate. No one has ever won a libel action against Mr. Sinclair, which, when you consider, and libel in Britain is a lot different than in the U.S. It's a easier case to lay. Let's see. Consider the charges he has made tells one something about present day society. I'm assuming he's talking about suits in London and not in the U.S. Whether his indictments of capitalism have ever made much impression outside the ranks of already converted is a different question. His best and one of his earliest books, The Jungle, a dreadful expose of labor conditions in the Chicago meat yards, was truly moving, if only because the fate of poor European peasants lured to America to be worked to death as factory drudges was a pitiful thing in itself. But only one of the book's revelations really got home on the public mind that conditions in the meat yards were dirty and infected carcasses were often offered for sale. The sufferings of the laborers went unnoticed. I had aimed at the public's heart, Upton Sinclair wrote later, and it hit its stomach. I doubt whether he will hit any part of its anatomy and with the world's end, which deals with the phase of society that has now passed away. But it puts some interesting pieces of blackguardianism on record. It is good history, if mediocre fiction. Okay. All right. One line. Yeah. Y'all want to go for another one? Section? Still got 11 of you here. Or y'all groovy? One end's good enough for me. It is known that the newspapers are habitually untruthful, but it is also known that they cannot tell lies of more than a certain magnitude. Review of the Invasion from Mars by Hadley Cantrill, The New Statesman and Nation, 26 October 1940. About to rain here. Nearly 2 years ago, Mr. Orson Welles produced on Columbia Broadcasting System in New York a radio play based on H.G. Wells' Fantasia, The War of the Worlds. The broadcast was not intended as a hoax, but it had an astonishing, unforeseen result. Thousands mistook it for a news broadcast and actually believed for hours that the Martians had invaded America and were marching across the countryside on steel legs, 100 feet high, massacring and all sundry in their heat rays. Some of the listeners were so panic stricken that they leapt into their cars and fled. Exact figures are, of course, unobtainable, but the compilers of this survey, it was made by one of the research departments of Princeton University, right? Oh man, it would have definitely been nuts sitting there listening to your vacuum tube radio and the Martians invade, have reason to think about 6 million people heard the broadcast and that well over a million were in some degree affected by the panic. Yeah, Spider Dog, but I love reading it and I love getting that visual of these things happening. Yeah, I are those anecdotal stories, Double D's, or are were they confirmed? I've always wondered that. Let's see. At the time, this affair caused amusement all over the world, and the credulity of those Americans was much commented on. No matter where I've gone in the world, uh, those Americans is a common trope. However, most of though its accounts that appeared abroad were somewhat misleading. The text of the Orson Welles production is given in full, and it appears that apart from the opening announcement and a piece of dialogue towards the end, the whole play is done in the form of a news bulletins, ostensibly real bulletins with names and of situation state with names of stations attached to them. This is a natural enough method of producing a play that of that type. But it was also natural that many people who happened to turn on the radio after the play had started should imagine that they were listening to a news broadcast. There were therefore two separate acts of belief involved. I, that the play was a news bulletin, and that a news bulletin can be taken as truthful. And it is just that the interest of the investigation lies. Let's see, Woodrow. It was a time when information moved much slow. Absolutely. And as Orwell says here, you know, if you don't get that disclaimer at the beginning, you can't go back to the beginning and watch. You're just turn on the radio and news broadcasters that you know because they're using these names and the station numbers and stuff like that. Um, would cause a hell of a panic. And your retraction obviously is going to be, as always, the retraction is page six news, right? Yeah. Oh, yeah. The fake missile strike. I completely forgot about that. But, you know, brain injuries and such. So, okay. In the USA, the wireless is the principal vehicle of news. There is a great number of broadcasting stations, and virtually every family owns a radio. The authors even make the surprising statement that it is much more usual to possess a radio than to take in a newspaper. Therefore, to transfer this incident to England, one has perhaps to imagine the news of the Martian invasion appearing on the front page of the evening papers. Undoubtedly, such a thing would cause a great stir. It is known that the newspapers are habitually untruthful, but it is also known that they cannot tell lies of more than a certain magnitude. And anyone seeing huge headlines in their paper announcing the arrival of a cylinder from Mars would probably believe what they read. At any rate, for the few minutes that would be needed to make some verification. The truly astonishing thing, however, was that so few of the listeners attempted any kind of check. How does that sound today? You get a fact, quote, a fact in say you're one of those. I get my facts on Facebook and I run with it without doing any checks. It is it is amazing. They say history, the people that like to say history repeats itself, but it never changes. People do the same things over and over again. Um, I my favorite go-to is, just go look at the frescoes in Rome, and it's pornography, it's shit talking, it's fake news. Um, they just had to take more time to shit talk and troll. It Nothing's changed since the written word. Sorry, my cat's crawling in my record store my record store bag. Um, it it might get loud in a minute. Yeah, yeah, double D's. The frescoes are amazing, especially when they're when they're showing dildos and dick sizes and stuff like that. It just cracks me up that people want to talk about the downgrading of society. Oops, sorry, scraping against the microphone. Um, the downfall of society and the information age and everything. Guess what? There was no 18 plus. Everybody could walk by and see it. Y'all, I keep forgetting that I can highlight comments while I'm doing this. And I gotta. I was looking for a PDF copy of this so I can read along. I don't know why I was thinking, oh, it's my book, so I'll just go do it then. Um, yeah, it is Spider Dog, but it's also, if you hear something, check on it. Don't assume it's fact. It's so easy, like that. I don't know who watched Todd's thing today, but this guy went on there and he was saying this Supreme Court case, well, Todd said it was Supreme Court, but the guy, it was the Ninth Circuit case, and the guy was saying that the dude won the case, but the court actually upheld the dude's conviction. So yes, those things are hilarious. It is my fault for something entering their home. Uh, she she thinks everything is hers. She will. I'll get up in the morning. My desk will be completely cleared off. She's a little. She's a little diva. Okay. Let's see. The truly astonishing thing, however, was that so few. Oh, okay. So few of the listeners attempted any kind of check. This is where I went off the rails. The compilers of the survey give details of 250 persons who mistake the broadcast for a news bulletin. I know. I truly hate this time of year. It is absolutely a it, yeah, I wish I was back in Arizona when it's this time of year. Well, I would live back in Arizona any day, down in the high desert. It was temperate all year long and nice and cool in the winter. Um, outside my door, I had a I had a trail I would run from 5,000 feet up to a peak of 10,000 feet, and then back down once a week. I absolutely loved it. Yeah, double D's, but you're in Arizona now. You don't have to deal with it. So let's see. So, of the 250 persons who mistook the broadcast for news bulletin, it appears that over a third of them attempted no kind of verification. As soon as they heard that the end of the world was coming, they accepted it uncritically. A few imagined that it was really a German or Japanese invasions, but the majority believed it was the Martians. And this included people who had only heard of the invasion from neighbors. That horrible game of telephone, right? Let's see. And even a few had started off with the knowledge that they were listening to a play, so they had actually heard the, the disclaimer at the beginning, and and over the course of the play, they had convinced themselves it was real. Who do we I mean, we know people like that. Oh, hang on. Started my other um but we know people like that, right? They know something's not true, but they will sit there and spin on it until they've convinced themselves that the opposite is true. So post truth, right? The survey does not reveal any single all embracing explanation of the panic. All it establishes is that the people most likely to be affected were poor, ill educated, and above all, people who were economically insecure and had unhappy private lives. The evident connection between personal unhappiness and readiness to believe the incredible is its most interesting discovery. So, hey, I mean, you know, and Jew, Jewish Darth Vader, he he did talk about Jewish Jedi shit, didn't he? So so we studying studying psychology. It's called magical thinking, right? Um, you're unhappy in your life. You have all of these things going on um, in your life, and you have this rich fantasy life, but then it turns unhealthy at some point, and you start you start trying to put this into your personal life, and then you become Yeah, absolutely, spider dog, and there's nothing wrong with it as long as you keep it healthy. Um, but once it starts ruling your life, I want to say you get conspiracy. You get this conspiratorial thinking, but having having been on the giving end of that life, a good healthy thought that there are conspiracies is good as long as you do it in a you do your research. Don't avoid facts and numbers when you're doing that said research. Um, Multiple sources of information you can get at, um, and you can do this all open source internet stuff. Look, I'm an introvert. I have to force myself out. Sometimes it's a labor to get on here until but once I do, um, I'm fine. I I enjoy the company and camaraderie. I but are we still here? My my internet connection went down. It started raining. I don't know why every time it starts raining, I'm what's up, Joey? Once it starts raining here, I don't know. It doesn't like the top floor for some reason. Oh, F3, G2, either or. Absolutely. I mean, I'll have me and him will have a connection. Ooh, Musk devices. Exactly. We're next door neighbors. Yeah. Me and my brother used to sit in ditches right across the street from each other and do the can and the string thing. We were very bored kids. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, we kind of get away with get away from paying the evil to have our modern conveniences. I get it. I mean, I have evil AT&T, so let's see. So the evident connection between personal unhappiness and readiness to believe the incredible is the most interesting discovery. Remarks like, let's think about what he's about to say here. Remarks like, everything is so upset in the world that anything might happen. Or, so long as everybody was going to die, it was all right, are surprisingly common in the answers to the questionnaire. People who have been out of work or on the verge of bankruptcy for 10 years may be actually relieved to hear the approaching end of civilization. It is a similar frame of mind that has induced whole nations to fling themselves into the arms of a savior. Whoa, 165 bucks a month for roaming. Is that unlimited double D's? My internet's included in my HOA. Okay. I mean, good. I mean, I remember when those Starlinks, not the Starlinks, the ones before that, like the HughesNet, um, it was an insane amount for like no uses whatsoever. Usage. Usage. Okay, here we go. We're gonna hit one more, and then I'm gonna. Yeah, it did. My parents had it their house next to mine on the farm. It was horrible. Like the same family of companies. I mean, never went away. FarmNet. So, one of the easiest pastimes in the world is debunking democracy. From Fascism and Democracy, The Left News, February 1941. One of the easiest pastimes in the world is debunking democracy. In this country, one is hardly obliged to bother any longer with the merely reactionary arguments against popular rule. But during the last 20 years, bourgeois democracy has been much more subtly attacked by both fascists and communists. It is highly significant that these seeming enemies have both attacked it on the same grounds. It is true that the fascists, with their bolder methods of propaganda, also use, when it suits them, the aristocratic arguments that democracy brings the worst men to the top. But the basic contention of all apologists of totalitarianism is that democracy is a fraud. So let me read that sentence again. It is true that fascists, with their bolder methods of propaganda, also use it when it suits them to the aristocratic argument that democracy brings the worst men to the top. But the basic contention of all apologists of a totalitarianism is that democracy is a fraud. It is supposed to be no more than a cover up for the rule of small handfuls of rich men. This is not altogether false, and still less, it is obviously false. On the contrary, there is more to be said for it than against it. A 16-year-old schoolboy can attack democracy much better than he can defend it. And one can answer him unless one knows the anti democratic case and is willing to admit the large measure of truth it contains. This was written today. Holy cow. Let's see, 41. So 83 years? 83 years ago. Almost 84, February of 41. Again, the more things stay the same, the more things stay the same. To begin with, it is always urged against bourgeois democracy that it is I hate the way this word it is negatived by economic inequality. What is the use of political liberty, so called, to a man who works 12 hours a day for £3 sterling a week? Once in 5 years, he may get a chance to vote for his favorite party, but for the rest of the time, particularly, every detail in his life is dictated by his employer. And in practice, his political life is dictated as well. The moneyed class can keep all the important ministerial and official jobs in its own hands, and it can work the electoral system in its own favor by bribing the electorate directly or indirectly. Even when by some mischance a government representing the poor classes gets into power, the rich can usually blackmail it by threatening to export capital. Hmm. So extorting people who um, want to work for the working classes by threatening to export capital, which, I mean, it has been done. Democracy is a buzzword for look at my right hand, ignore what my left hand is doing. It has been for a very, very long time. Look at the Senate in Rome. I propose that the task and conditions have not changed, but the delivery method. Absolutely, it's more rapid. It's more. It's more easily accessible, and dare I say, more vapid. Absolutely, abso-freaking-lutely. If you praise a man for firing their workforce for wanting to unionize, um, you better watch out. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Most important of all, nearly the whole cultural and intellectual life of the community, newspapers, books, education, films, radio, is controlled by moneyed men who have the strongest motive to prevent the spread of certain ideas. Oh, absolutely, double D's. Yeah, you're right. stealing your data and selling it off. Think, but I mean, we let's go back to the development of the moral majority, right? Jerry Falwell and stuff. So when he when the religious right got in bed with the um, Re- Republican Party, um, selling your data was a big thing, right? The moral majority was collecting names, phone numbers, addresses, and selling it then to lobbies and special interests. Anybody who would pay for it, right? So they got rich. Uh, they built their worlds on already. Some of them already had big worlds, but they built their worlds on that. You'll find your megachurch pastors did that and continue to do selling information that way. Sometimes it's easier because churches will publish their bulletins online. People want to talk about doxing for goodness sakes. They they put people's birthdays, phone numbers, and names on there. I know this because I had to stop my dad from doing it with his church. so so yeah, information is power. And believe me, I got addicted to just having the information. It was like a drug when I had access to it. So let's see. The citizen of a democratic, oh, yeah, the citizen of a democratic country is conditioned from birth onwards less rigidly, but not much less effectively than he would be in a totalitarian state. And there is no certainty that the rule of a privileged class can never be broken by purely democratic means. In theory, labor governments could come into office with a clear majority and proceed at once to establish socialism by act of parliament. In practice, moneyed classes would rebel and probably with success because they would have most of the permanent officials and key men in the armed forces on their side. Democratic methods are only possible when there is a fairly large basis of agreement between all political parties. There is no strong reason for thinking that any really fundamental change can ever be achieved peacefully. Again, I'm sure that that will be clipped if people see this beyond us here. Again, it is often argued that the whole facade of democracy, freedom of speech and assembly, independent trade unions, and so forth, must collapse as soon as the moneyed classes are no longer in a position to make concessions to their employees. Political liberty, it is said, is simply a bribe, a bloodless substitute for the Gestapo. It is a fact that the countries we call democratic are usually prosperous countries. In most cases, they are exploiting cheap colored labor directly or indirectly. Remember, this is 1941. And also that democracy, as we know it, has never existed except in maritime or mountainous countries, i.e., countries which can defend themselves without the need for an enormous standing army. Democracy accompanies probably demands favorable conditions of life. It has never flourished in poor and militarized states. Take away England's sheltered position, so it is said, and England will promptly revert to political methods as barbarous as those of Romania. I love how then it was spelled Rumania, Rumania. Moreover, all government, democratic or totalitarianism, rests ultimately on force. No government, unless it intends to connive at its own overthrow, can or does show us the smallest respect for democratic rights when once it is seriously menaced. A democratic country fighting a desperate war is forced just as much as an autocracy or a fascist state to conscript soldiers, coerce labor, imprison defeatists, suppress seditious newspapers. In other words, it can only save itself from destruction by ceasing to be democratic. The thing it is supposed to be fighting for always scrapped as soon as the fighting starts. So that, roughly summarized, is the case against bourgeoisie democracy. Advanced by fascists and communists alike, though with differences of emphasis, at every point one has got to admit that it contains such truth. And yet, why is it that it is ultimately false? For everyone bred in a democratic country knows quasi instinctively that there is something wrong with the whole of this line of argument. What is wrong with this familiar debunking of democracy is that it cannot explain the whole of the facts. The actual differences in social atmosphere and political behavior between country and country are far greater than we can be explained by any theory which writes off laws, customs, traditions, etc., as mere superstructure. On paper, it is very simple to demonstrate that democracy is just the same or just as bad as totalitarianism. There are concentration camps in Germany, but then there are concentration camps in India. Jews are persecuted wherever fascism reigns. But what about the color laws in South Africa? Oh, Daniel, we're reading On Truth. Oh, I'm sorry. I can do this. Orwell on Truth. It is excerpts of his writings about truth in a post-truth era, as I have maybe uneloquently truth in a post-truth world. Sorry, dubbed it. So, so we're at superstructure on paper. Yes, we did. I think this was pre-entry into the war, so we were not yet interning. I mean, you could call reservations giant concentration camps. Double D's uh, ruling. I don't want to be insensitive. But I mean, I think my people have a lot in common with the Native Americans. Well, we may read Nietzsche one day. Got to and you gotta finish the quote there, Daniel, from Nietzsche that God is dead. We've killed him on the altars and in the cathedrals, I think. Yeah, I mean, look, we do not have clean hands in so many things. So, on paper, it is very simple to demonstrate that democracy is just the same as or just as bad as totalitarianism. There are concentration camps in Germany, but then there are concentration camps in India. Jews are persecuted wherever fascism reigns, but what about the color laws in South Africa? So I'm gonna um and where did Germany get the ideas from their concentration camps? They got them from the British concentration camps in Africa on the continent uh, during their occupation, and it wasn't just Africans that they were interning; they were interning the Boers, and of course, then you go, oh, it just gets ugly. Or once you honestly read history, you don't look at it the same again. So, intellectual honesty is a crime in any totalitarian country. But even in England, it is not exactly profitable to speak and write the truth. These parallels can be extended indefinitely. But the implied argument all along the line is that a difference of degree is not a difference. It is quite true, for instance, that there is political persecution in democratic countries. The question is, how much? How many refugees have fled from Britain or from the whole of the British Empire during the past 7 years? And how many from Germany? How many people personally known to you have been beaten with rubber truncheons or forced to swallow pints of castor oil? How dangerous do you feel it to be? This is a sentence. How dangerous do you feel it to be to go into the nearest pub and express your opinion that this is a capitalist war and we ought to stop fighting? Can you point to anything in recent British or American history that compares with the June Purge, the Russian Trotskyist trials, the pogrom that followed von Rath's assassination? Could any article equivalent to the one I am writing be printed in any totalitarian country, red, brown, or black? Now, this was 41. McCarthy was post World War II because McCarthy was Cohen, not Cohen, Kahn, Trump's Trump's mentor, uh, Roy Kahn. Somebody help. And how many people forgot about we had the Hollywood blacklist during McCarthy, but how many people Cone. Okay. Thanks, Lola and howdy. Um, Post World War II, there was the Red Scare and then there was the Pink Scare. Remember that? where he was trying to root out gays in the military, while him and Roy Khan were together. That's not conjecture, by the way. That's just the way it is. So, yet another great poster, Woodrow. Uh, could you pass on some great Orwell postering ideas to a, a mutual friend? Intellectual crime in any totalitarian country. I can't read it backwards. But even in England, it is not exactly profitable to speak and write truth. Great Orwellian style again. Okay, 2 hours and 60 minutes. We can sit here and talk for a few minutes. I'm going to pause this. We'll probably pick up tomorrow at 4 if y'all want to. What what's the best time for everybody? I'd like to. I know. I was being more facetious, Woodrow. I don't. Joey is the only one that he he kind of keeps around. He's the token F3 chatter, I think. Easy, easy like Sunday morning, Spider Dog. I mean, double D's. I think I would take that as a point of pride, just like who was a priestess that was had a had Burr in her in their lineage. Let's see if we've got. I was just checking to see if Jeff had us a show scheduled or not. So we'll do episode 2 of this tomorrow. If comment if if y'all like this format, was just something I thought I would try. Um, when I came out of my funk, I was shocked that it had been 3 weeks since I had posted my second PTSD episode. So I do apologize for that. I've got to get some research going back on that. But this seemed like a relevant time to do this. Um, oh, Spider Dog, no problem. Um, you probably get to know me a little more on a different level than on our normal um, broadcasts, which is fine. Hey, I love going and laughing. Um, I get to wax religiously and poetically sometimes over there, and it so if there's a question, um, so I'm just especially sorry, Lola. I I laugh about the English major because now Todd was saying he was an English major today in his on his stream. It was was quite entertaining today. So, okay, groovy, groovy. I'm glad. I will schedule that. And Lola, believe me, I know. Well, I mean, it's just like he was I mean, did he even do 2 years? I don't know. He went twice. He did. I mean, he did graduate. He had quit, then he went back to so he could join the army. So around that time, it was really hard to. Look, I was closer to a combat paratrooper than him. I was on a mission. We were scheduled to jump into Iraq, uh, pre-invasion, but instead we had to do it the hundred and worst way in air assault. It was not fair. I did not like it. I wasn't even air assault qualified, so I wanted my mustard stain. Damn it, Nomad, Nomad, you are such a blessing. Y'all have no idea how much work knowing it Nomad has been to me and cleaning my channel up. Once I once I figure my life out here, I need to change this G2 up here to the new one you made for me. This was just an AI one I came up with. I did. AI is working chat GPT was a pain in the ass to me. But I'll be putting it up on when I schedule the show nowadays. Got an earring eyebrow. Okay. I will hopefully see you guys later. If not, I will see y'all around in Discord and stuff until tomorrow at 4. Thank y'all for being attentive. Kept kept good numbers going for something that maybe is not for everyone, but hey, like it, share it, and I will see you guys.